By the time Goldfinger was released in cinemas, Bond mania was well and truly underway. Sean Connery had cemented himself so firmly in the role, even some of the movie posters proclaimed that Sean Connery is James Bond. The idea that in just under 2 films' time Sean Connery would step away and a new actor would step into the role seemed inconceivable. And I think that it's Goldfinger that in many ways really hones and cements what would be the template for Bond films to come. The pre-title sequence and theme song had been established in the previous entry from Russia with Love, but it's here in Goldfinger where this really establishes the tradition and really makes it incredibly successful. The song Goldfinger, sung by Shirley Bassey, was a huge hit, and there's a certain unmistakable confidence and swagger in which the opening sequence is played. And the film is absolutely littered with iconic characters, one-liners, and signature moments that have stayed with cinema fans ever since. And interestingly, it was around this time that merchandising started to appear around the brand of James Bond, and crucially, for the first time we start to see James Bond toys. And, of course, it's toys that we're here to talk about. So today, I'm going to be taking a look at the Sideshow Collectibles Goldfinger action figures that were released in the early 2000s. So they released 3 figures in this wave. There was Sean Connery as James Bond, there was Oddjob, and there was Pussy Galore. Today, I'm going to be taking a look at the James Bond and the Oddjob figures. What's quite nice about these is that when you stack them together on their side in terms of the packaging, you can see each of the figures there, and they have different colours as well. So James Bond is usually in the blue, the villain is usually in the red. And they stack together very, very nicely so that they can be very presentable on a shelf. I'll start by looking at the Bond first. The packaging for each figure features the film poster, or one of the film posters. Personally, I'm not a great fan of this particular poster. It seems a little bit dull to me. It doesn't have an awful lot going on in it. And when we open up that gatefold cover there, we have the cast list and information about the film, which is really, really a nice touch. And of course, on the right-hand side, we have that window packaging to see Bond and all his accessories. Meanwhile, on the reverse of the packaging, we have both figures in this wave. We have the Sean Connery, and of course we've got the Oddjob at the bottom there. We have some snaps from throughout the film, and of course a little bit more information about the character. I really love the branding, and I love the style and layout of this packaging. I think it's really fantastic, and I love the approach they've taken with it, so this is always a treat. Okay, when we open him up and we get him out of the packaging, this is how he looks. The tailor on this figure is very nice. Unfortunately, it is a little bit bland. It is, of course, taken from his stealth mission. And although I appreciate him doing something different, not just sticking him in a tuxedo again, I would have much preferred they put him in that iconic silver 3-piece suit. Because as it is, there's not an awful lot of detail to draw on or make this figure look particularly interesting or, stand out on the shelf. You can lift his jumper up and he does have a black shirt underneath it, but again, it's fairly unremarkable, and it's not like there's a second outfit there that you can do much with, to be honest. Things are a little bit improved by putting the backpack on him, so it has those blue stripes there to just add a little bit more colour to it and a bit more interest, but it could have used a bit more colour to be a bit more interesting. The likeness in this figure is a bit hit and miss, to be honest. I don't think it's a terrible likeness, but at the same time it definitely feels off. Like, this doesn't feel like the Goldfinger Sean Connery at all. And in case you were wondering how he compares to the head sculpt on the Dr. No figure, whether it was just recycled, well, it is actually a completely different sculpt. You can see that in the hairline and some of the little details on the face there. So it's not that they didn't make the effort here, I just feel like it's just shy of the mark, really. As for articulation, well, it is pretty much the same on all Sideshow Collectibles figures from this time, but I'll quickly run through it in case this is your first time. He has a ball-jointed head, well, he has a ball-jointed neck, I should say, and that means, of course, that he can roll it around, he can move it from side to side, he can look up and down a good distance too, which is fantastic. He also has ball-jointed shoulders, meaning that he can lift his arms up and out to the side, and he's got double-jointed elbows, meaning that he can get his hand all the way back to his head there, which is great. He also has a swivel at the wrist, but that wrist also hinges. He also has an upper ab joint as well in the top of his chest there, allowing him to swivel from side to side, and this joint is very flexible, allowing a huge range of dynamic posing, which is excellent. He's also got hinged hips, meaning that his legs can kick out to the side, and they can also kick forwards and backwards as well, which is great, a huge range of motion there, so no problems whatsoever. He's also got complementary double jointed knees, so again he can kick his leg right the way back if you want him to. He does have a swivel at the top of his ankle, and there is also a hinge on the ankle there as well, allowing his foot to hinge upwards and down. His backpack is one of his extra features. This fits on him very, very snugly and looks pretty decent. You can undo the poppers to reveal a bit of paper stuck in the back there, so probably don't need to undo the poppers to be fair, but it does create that nice squishy feel inside to make it feel and look like the pack is full. Again, there's not an awful lot of detail on the pack, but what is there is quite nice. So the buckles are a nice silver there, and of course the blue straps are quite colourful and distinctive as well, which is cool. And aside from the backpack, he also has a few other little bits and pieces. So he has a gold bar from Fort Knox, a bit of that broken off panelling that we see in the film, a pistol with a searchlight, his Walther PPK, and his tracking transponder. Now, usually I rave about the hands that Sideshow give their figures. I really love that they're hard but flexible enough in terms of they're a solid rubber, and they have individual figures which allow them to grip things quite tightly, but they're flexible enough to be able to grip wider things and a whole range and diverse assortment of different accessories, which is fantastic. However, I don't know if it's 100% successful on this figure particularly. For example, he really struggles to hold the Walther PPK, which of course is his signature weapon. And, you know, it will fit in his hand and you can get the finger through the trigger there, as you can see, but it doesn't look right. It looks a bit clunky and it doesn't really look like he's properly holding it. It just looks a bit strange. Meanwhile, in the other hand, when you put that bit of piping in there, it wants to fall out, it wants to slip through his grip there. That being said, he does hold the other weapon perfectly well, and that's because it has a wider grip, and so the fingers are really have been sculpted for this weapon, because he holds this absolutely perfectly. The finger rests neatly on the trigger there, and it looks good. It looks really solid. So this is really the gun you're going to want to put in his hand when you put him on display. Likewise, he can hold the transponder in the other hand perfectly well as well. It doesn't look like it's going to fall out or slip through those fingers, which is really good. And the overall presentation of the figure is nice. There's just something a little bit lacklustre and a little bit disappointing about this one, because obviously Goldfinger of all the Sean Connery Bond films is probably his most famous, and yeah, I just feel, you know, I wish they put him in the silver suit. So moving on to Oddjob, we can see here obviously the packaging again has a different film poster. Now for my money, this is the superior poster. I love this. I think it's a fantastic image. It's illustrated, it's really evocative of everything that happens in the film. It's really action-packed, and of course Oddjob is centre stage there, and I think this looks fantastic. Really exciting poster, and I'm really glad to have it on this figure. Again, when we open that gatefold cover there, we have information about the film itself, the cast list, and of course we can see Oddjob in all his glory there in the window packaging, which is great. And then once more on the reverse of the packaging, we have a bit of information about the character. We can see the two figures in the line, and we have some different clips, some snapshots there from the film. Again, I absolutely love this packaging. I think it's super displayable and it just looks really, really good. And here he is out of the packaging. Now, Oddjob is one of the harder ones to get in this series now on the aftermarket. He goes for silly money and he's very, very tricky to track down. He happens to also be, in my opinion, one of the very best in this entire line. And part of that comes down to the fact that he's very distinctive from any other figure in this line. Now, the presentation and the tailoring on this figure is absolutely superb. This is some of Sideshow's best work during these years. I love the little details, how they've got the necktie just right, the way they've buttoned up that jacket, the costume, the material they've used for the costume is absolutely brilliant. I really love the pants on it. It's got that fine pinstripe going through it. It just looks really solid. Perfectly authentic to what we see on screen, and it's just really nicely made. There's a lot of nice textures to it, and there's just lots of little fine details, like the little button there that's left undone that you can't close. And interestingly, this figure features completely unique hands. This is a unique hand mold just for Oddjobs, just so he can throw that hat, which is brilliant. And this is kind of similar to what we see with Jaws as well in the series. He has a completely different mold from the rest of the figures in this line. One of the really cool things that makes this figure really unique is the fact that he is a larger, more rotund kind of character, so they've given him a lot more padding around the waist there, so it's actually kind of squishy, so it feels a bit soft to the touch, but it looks really, really good and very effective. What's also nice is that when you open up his jacket, he has the waistcoat underneath as well, and again, this is beautifully designed. It looks really, really, really neat, and it just looks great, yeah, really presentable. So I love this. I love the attention to detail on this figure. He's definitely one of the strongest in this line. And in terms of the likeness, I have to say, I feel like they've pretty much nailed it. Now, obviously, with all these things, it is subjective and it depends on what the source reference material would have been. But I have to say, I think this is pretty much perfect, really. This is exactly what I expect from Oddjob, and it's great. Now, given that his mould is very different, you might be curious to know whether this impacts at all on the articulation. Well, I'm pleased to say it doesn't. So he has the same articulation that you would get from a standard Sideshow collectibles figure. So he's got the same ball-jointed neck, allowing his head to move all the way around, up and down, which is great. He's got the ball-jointed shoulders, allowing his arms to kick up and out to the side. Double jointed elbows, allowing that extra motion there, and he also has the swivel at the wrist and of course the hinge at the wrist as well. So no compromise here whatsoever, and a huge range of motion as well. And if you're worried about the articulation around the waist or in that upper chest area, don't, because again, it is not compromised at all. He can still move from side to side and arch forwards and backwards a little bit as well. So that extra padding doesn't impact on that whatsoever. So this is fantastic. This is the best of all possible worlds. For accessories, Oddjob comes with the other half of that giant bit of paneling. He has, of course, his bowler hat, a pistol with silencer, and 2 gold bars. I really like how Sideshow went to the trouble of painting the rim and the interior of the bowler hat. It seems like such a simple thing to take for granted these days, but honestly, back in the day, these little details made all the difference. It does fit perfectly onto his head. It's not a tight fit, it's quite loose, but it doesn't feel like it's too loose that it's going to pop off at any point. So it's just perfectly placed on his head then. It doesn't look silly or too big on his head when it is on, which is great. Another really cool about his gun is that the silencer just unscrews. So you have the pistol and then you can put the silencer back on. This is a lovely little touch. The only problem is that the gun doesn't really fit into that hand. That hand has been moulded especially for the bowler hat and it doesn't really work. His fingers cannot touch the trigger, unfortunately. So it looks okay, but it doesn't look quite right. It does, however, allow him to hold that big piece of wood there nice and tight, and this looks pretty solid. Likewise, he can hold the hat into that throwing pose, which of course is iconic, and that is essential because that is what the hand has been moulded for, and this looks really, really kind of cool. The only thing I would say is it's not a tight fit, so that hat is quite liable to fall out there, so you have to be careful with it. One of the other really cool things is when you take both of those 2 bits of wooden paneling from each character, so the piece from Oddjob, the piece from Bond, you'll notice that they actually complement each other, and if you want, you can slide them together to make one original piece. So this is really, really cool. I love this. This is an extra touch, an extra little detail that I wouldn't have thought for them to do, and yeah, they've gone ahead and done it. So, you know, extra marks for this. This is a really cool little thing to do. So, in conclusion, these are a great pair of figures. Now, I have to say, I think the Oddjob is the superior in this set. The Sean Connery Goldfinger Bond, it's a nice figure, but it's a little bit bland. The likeness isn't that strong. It's not terrible, but it's not the greatest. And his accessories are nice, but not earth-shattering. I think if you're torn between the two, and you have to choose between the Dr. No and the Goldfinger, I'd probably opt for the Dr. No. That's going to give you more of a flavour of what the Sean Connery James Bond figure is all about. That said, this Sean Connery Bond figure is a very nice complement to the Oddjob, especially as those 2 linking pieces fit together very nicely on that wood paneling, which is a really lovely little touch. So if you want that effect, then you're probably going to want both of these. The Oddjob, on the other hand, I would say is unmissable. If you're a Bond fan and you are collecting these figures in this line, then Oddjob is going to be one of the centerpieces of this collection. I would say alongside Jaws, because these figures are very distinctive. They're very different to any other in the line, and they just have a lot more gravitas because of that. And they just stand out. They make the collection pop, and I think the detailing on Oddjob is lovely. The likeness is really strong. His accessories are fantastic. Hell, even his box is brilliant. It's got a fantastic poster on the front there. So everything about this figure is really presentable. It's a top-notch figure, and I think, you know, yeah, if you're missing him, you've got to try and track him down somehow, because he's absolutely brilliant, and I'd say he's one of the few that probably is worth the extra money on the secondary market now. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.